What happens when Hollywood's most legendary tough guy walks into the lion's den of daytime television and refuses to back down from a confrontation that would make most celebrities run for cover? Well, you're about to find out. Because what unfolded between Clint Eastwood and Joy Behar on The View wasn't just television. It was a verbal showdown that exposed everything wrong with modern media. If you want to see how this explosive encounter completely derailed, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me which side you're on. Because trust me, you're going to have strong feelings about this one. The show opened with typical pleasantries as Clint Eastwood settled into the guest chair. The other hosts seemed genuinely excited to have him there. "Mr. Eastwood, it's such an honor to have you here," Whoopi said warmly. "Your new film is getting incredible reviews." "Thank you," Eastwood replied with his characteristic understated charm. "It's been a project I've wanted to tackle for years." Sarah Haynes jumped in eagerly. "What drew you to this particular story?" "Well, it's about redemption, really," Eastwood explained. "About how people can change, even when others have written them off. I think that's a universal theme that resonates with audiences." The conversation flowed naturally for several minutes, with thoughtful questions about his directorial process and decades in Hollywood. But Joy sat quietly, clearly waiting for her moment. Finally, she leaned forward with that calculated smile. "Clint. Can I call you Clint?" "Sure. You've been in this business for what, 60 years? That's a long time. Things have changed a lot, haven't they?" Eastwood nodded slowly. "They have. Technology, distribution methods, the way films are made. But good storytelling is still good storytelling. But maybe some of the old ways of thinking don't work anymore," Joy pressed. "I mean, audiences today want different things. They're more, shall we say, enlightened than they used to be." You could see Eastwood's expression shift slightly. "Enlightened? How?" "Well, more socially conscious. More aware of representation, diversity, inclusion. Things that maybe weren't priorities back in your day." "Back in my day?" Eastwood repeated, his voice carrying a slight edge now. Joy pressed on, seemingly oblivious to the warning signs. "I'm just saying, some of those old Western values, that rugged individualism thing, it might seem a little outdated to younger viewers." "Outdated," Eastwood said flatly. "Not outdated, maybe just less relevant? I mean, we live in a more collaborative world now. People understand that the lone wolf mentality isn't really sustainable." Eastwood leaned back in his chair, fixing Joy with that famous stare. "So you're saying my films promote outdated values?" "I'm saying maybe it's time to evolve, to embrace more progressive themes. Your movies have always been very, how do I put this, male-centric, very traditional gender roles." The other hosts were starting to look uncomfortable. Whoopi tried to interject. "Joy, I think what Clint's work shows is," but Joy cut her off. "No. I think this is important to discuss. We have young people watching who need to see themselves represented. Not just the same old cowboys and cops and vigilantes." Eastwood's jaw tightened visibly. "So now I'm promoting vigilantism? Well, Dirty Harry wasn't exactly a poster boy for police reform, was he?" Joy said with a laugh that no one else joined. "I mean, that whole make my day mentality? It's kind of problematic when you think about it." "Problematic," Eastwood repeated slowly. "Right. It glorifies violence as a solution to problems. It suggests that one person can just decide what's right and what's wrong and act accordingly. That's not how society works anymore." Sarah tried to jump in. "But Joy, these are fictional characters." "Are they, though?" Joy interrupted. "Or do they reflect the filmmaker's worldview? Because when you look at Clint's body of work, there's definitely a pattern there. Strong silent types who solve problems with guns. Not exactly the message we want to send in today's climate." Eastwood's voice dropped to that familiar gravelly whisper. "And what message would you prefer I send? Maybe something about working together, about understanding different perspectives, About the fact that not every problem can be solved by one person taking the law into their own hands. Ever. I see, Eastwood said quietly. So you think my films have been harmful to society? Joy shrugged. I think they represent a certain mindset that maybe we've outgrown as a culture. The whole strongman narrative, the idea that might makes right, that's not what those films are about, Eastwood replied, his control starting to slip just slightly. Isn't it, though? I mean, when Harry Callahan pulls out that magnum and threatens criminals, what's the message there? When the man with no name shoots first and asks questions later, what are we supposed to take away from that? Eastwood stared at her for a long moment. Have you actually watched any of my films? Of course I have, Joy said defensively. Because what you're describing sounds like you read the plot summaries on Wikipedia. Joy's face reddened slightly. I don't need to justify my viewing habits to you. No, but if you're going to sit there and tell me what my own movies are about, maybe you should actually understand them first. The tension in the studio was becoming palpable. The other hosts were exchanging worried glances, and you could see the producers frantically gesturing from behind the cameras. I understand them perfectly, Joy shot back. They're power fantasies for men who think the solution to every problem is violence. Eastwood's famous squint narrowed. Is that right? That's right. And maybe it's time for filmmakers to take some responsibility for the messages they're putting out into the world. Eastwood set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision, the small clink echoing in the suddenly silent studio. When he spoke, his voice carried that deadly quiet tone that had made villains tremble in a dozen westerns. Responsibility, he said slowly. You want to talk about responsibility? Joy, apparently mistaking his calm for surrender, smiled triumphantly. Exactly. Artists have a responsibility to... No. Eastwood cut her off, his voice still low but carrying an unmistakable authority. You want to talk about responsibility? Let's talk about the responsibility of a talk show host to actually know what she's talking about before she opens her mouth. Joy's smile faltered. Excuse me? You heard me. You sit there and lecture me about my films promoting violence. But you clearly haven't understood a single one of them. I understand them perfectly well, Joy snapped, her composure starting to crack. Do you? Because Unforgiven, which won me the Oscar for Best Picture, is entirely about the consequences of violence. It's about how killing destroys the killer as much as the victim. Did you miss that part? Joy shifted uncomfortably. Well, and $1 Million Baby isn't about boxing. It's about dignity and sacrifice and what we owe each other as human beings. Gran Torino isn't about vigilantism. It's about redemption and understanding across cultural lines. But you wouldn't know that because you didn't actually watch them, did you? Of course I watched them, Joy insisted. But her voice lacked conviction. Really? Then tell me what happens at the end of Unforgiven. Joy opened her mouth, then closed it, clearly scrambling. Eastwood pressed on relentlessly. Or how about the outlaw Josie Wales? What's that one about? Since you're such an expert on my violent power fantasies. Look, I don't need to prove anything to you, Joy said, her voice rising defensively. No, you don't rather. But maybe you should prove something to your audience. Maybe you should demonstrate that you actually know what you're talking about before you go on national television and trash someone's life's work. Whoopi tried to intervene. Okay, let's maybe take this down a notch. But Joy was having none of it. I don't have to sit here and be lectured by someone who's clearly out of touch with modern values. No, man. Eastwood's eyebrows raised slightly. Out of touch? Lady, I've been making movies about racial reconciliation since before you knew what a talk show was. I've explored themes of redemption, justice, and human dignity in ways that apparently went right over your head. Oh, please, Joy scoffed. A few token minority characters doesn't make you progressive. The studio went dead quiet. Even the camera operators seemed to freeze. Joy had just crossed a line that everyone could feel but nobody wanted to acknowledge. Eastwood's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Token characters? I'm just saying, throwing in a few diverse faces doesn't automatically make your movies enlightened. Bird, Eastwood said quietly. What? Bird. My film about Charlie Parker. Entirely about a black jazz musician and his struggle with art, addiction, and society. I spent 3 years researching his life, talking to people who knew him, making sure I got it right. Was that tokenism? Joy fumbled for words. Well, that's different. Is it? What about my portrayal of Morgan Freeman in Unforgiven? Or Danny Glover? In any of the films we made together? Were those token roles too? You're twisting my words, Joy said desperately. No, I'm using your words. You said token characters. You implied I don't understand modern values. You suggested my films promote violence and outdated thinking, all without apparently having actually watched them or understood them. Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. No, Eastwood said firmly, his gaze never leaving Joy. I think we should finish this conversation. Because this is what's wrong with discourse today. People like you who think having an opinion is the same thing as having knowledge. Joy's face was flushed red now. People like me? People who talk without thinking. People who judge without understanding. People who think being loud makes them right. How dare you? Joy sputtered. How dare I what? Tell the truth? Point out that you're criticizing films you clearly haven't watched? Or haven't understood if you did watch them? I don't have to take this from some washed-up actor who can't accept that the world has moved past his outdated machismo. The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down in the middle of Main Street. Every person in that studio knew Joy had just made a catastrophic mistake. Eastwood smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Washed up? I mean, when's the last time you made a relevant film? When's the last time you connected with audiences under 60? The Mule made over $100 million worldwide. I was 88 when I made it. American Sniper made over $500 million and was nominated for 6 Academy Awards. I was 84. But you're right. Clearly I've lost my touch. Joy was sinking fast and she knew it. Box office doesn't equal relevance, doesn't it? Then what does? Your approval? The approval of people who don't actually watch the films they criticize? I'm trying to have an intelligent conversation about— No, Eastwood interrupted, his famous intensity now fully focused on her. You're trying to score cheap political points by attacking someone you think can't fight back. You came in here with an agenda, and you figured the old cowboy would just sit there and take it. That's not what I'm doing, Joy protested weakly. Isn't it? You started this conversation by telling me my values are outdated. You suggested I step aside for fresher voices. You called my characters problematic, without understanding what they represent. You dismissed my entire body of work as violent power fantasies, and when I called you on it, you called me washed up. The other hosts were staring at Joy in horror, realizing she had walked into a gunfight with a water pistol. Well, maybe if you weren't so defensive, Joy tried lamely. Eastwood leaned forward slightly, and his voice carried the weight of 50 years in Hollywood. Lady, I've been in this business since before you were born. I've survived studio heads, critics, changing times, and every trend that's come and gone. I've won Academy Awards, influenced generations of filmmakers, and created characters that are part of American culture. And you think I'm going to be intimidated by a talk show host who doesn't do her homework? Joy's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Here's some free advice, Eastwood continued, his tone now almost conversational but no less deadly. Next time you want to ambush a guest, maybe watch their movies first. Maybe understand what you're talking about. Maybe show a little respect for someone who's earned it. Joy finally found her voice, but it came out as a croak. I don't think I have to listen to this. You don't think you have to listen to this? Eastwood repeated, his voice carrying that unmistakable edge that had made him a legend. Well, that's the problem right there, isn't it? Joy tried to regain her footing. I think we've gotten off track here. No, we're right on track. You don't think you have to listen because you've never had to be accountable for the things you say. You just throw out accusations and move on to the next topic. I'm not throwing out accusations. I'm having a discussion. A discussion requires two people who respect each other enough to engage honestly. What you're doing is called character assassination. Whoopi made one final attempt to salvage the segment. Maybe we should. But Eastwood held up a hand, without taking his eyes off Joy. No. I think the audience deserves to see this play out. They deserve to see what happens when someone decides to attack a guest based on ignorance and prejudice. Prejudice? Joy's voice shot up an octave. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? You prejudged my work. You prejudged my values. You prejudged my relevance. All without actually engaging with any of it honestly. That's the definition of prejudice. That's ridiculous. I can't be prejudiced against you. I'm what? White? Male? Old? So that makes it okay? Joy realized she was walking into another trap, but couldn't stop herself. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Because it sure sounds like you think my age and background disqualify me from having an opinion about my own work. Look, all I'm saying is that perspectives change, and maybe it's time for some of the older generation to listen to younger voices. I've been listening to younger voices my entire career. I've worked with directors who were decades younger than me. I've adapted stories by writers from different generations and backgrounds. But that's not what you want, is it? Joy looked confused. What do you mean? You don't want dialogue. You don't want exchange of ideas. You want submission. You want me to sit here and nod while you lecture me about how wrong I've been for the past 60 years. That's not true, isn't it? Because every time I've tried to explain what my films actually say, you've ignored it and gone back to your talking points. You're not interested in my perspective at all. Sarah tried desperately to redirect. Maybe we could talk about your upcoming projects. But Joy, apparently unable to help herself, jumped back in. I just think that public figures need to be more aware of their influence on society. Eastwood's laugh was sharp and humorless. My influence on society? Let me tell you about my influence on society. I've employed thousands of people over my career. I've told stories that have moved people, made them think, made them feel. I've created art that will outlast both of us. But art has consequences. Yes, it does. And the consequence of my art is that people remember what it means to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Even when people like you tell them they're wrong for trying. Joy's voice was getting shrill now. People like me? People who tear down instead of build up. People who think criticism is the same thing as insight. People who mistake cynicism for sophistication. I am not cynical. Aren't you? You've spent this entire interview trying to diminish my work, my career, my relevance. You haven't said one positive thing about anything I've accomplished. That's not journalism. That's just mean-spirited. The other hosts were now openly staring at Joy in disbelief. Even the audience seemed uncomfortable with how far she'd pushed this. I'm not being mean-spirited. I'm being honest. No, you're being hostile. There's a difference. Honesty would have been watching my films before you criticize them. Honesty would have been acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, a man who's been making movies for 60 years might know something about storytelling. Joy's last desperate gambit came out as almost a whine. Well, I'm entitled to my opinion. Yes, you are, but you're not entitled to have that opinion go unchallenged, especially when it's based on nothing but ignorance and spite. Spite? I don't have any spite toward you. Eastwood fixed her with that legendary stare. Then why did you invite me here? To promote my film? To have an interesting conversation about cinema? Or to try to score points by taking down someone you thought would be an easy target? Joy opened her mouth but no words came out. That's what I thought, Eastwood said quietly. You know what your problem is? You've forgotten that the person sitting across from you is a human being. You see me as a symbol, a target, a representative of everything you think is wrong with the world. But I'm just a guy who makes movies. But those movies have meaning. Yes, they do. They have more meaning than you'll ever understand. Because you've never taken the time to actually understand them. You've just decided what they must mean based on your own biases. The studio had gone completely silent except for the low hum of the cameras. Joy looked around desperately, as if hoping someone would rescue her from the hole she'd dug. Eastwood stood up slowly, his movement deliberate and final. "You know what? I think we're done here." "Wait, you can't just leave," Joy protested. "Why not? You've made it clear you have no interest in an actual conversation. You just want to lecture me about how wrong I am about my own life and work. But we're not finished." Eastwood looked down at her with something that might have been pity. "Yes, we are. This whole thing was finished before it started. Because you never intended to treat me with basic respect." He began removing his microphone, his movements calm and controlled. "You want some advice? Next time you have a guest on, try remembering that they're a person, not a piñata. Try learning something about them before you decide to attack them. And try showing a little humility when you're talking to someone who's accomplished more in their career than you ever will." Joy's face went through several shades of red. "How dare you? How dare I what? Tell you the truth? Point out that you've been rude and unprofessional? Lady, I've been in tougher spots than this. With people a lot scarier than you." He handed his microphone to a stunned production assistant and turned back to Joy one final time. "You know what the real tragedy is here? You could have had a great interview. You could have learned something. You could have given your audience something worth watching. Instead, you chose to be small." Joy was sputtering now, but no coherent words were coming out. Eastwood addressed the other hosts with a slight nod. "Ladies, it's been interesting." Then he looked directly into the camera, his voice carrying that familiar authority one last time. "Folks at home, I hope you got something out of this. Sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when they're hiding behind a microphone and a smile." And with that, Clint Eastwood walked off the set of The View, leaving Joy Behar sitting in stunned silence, while the other hosts scrambled to figure out how to end the most disastrous interview in the show's history. The cameras kept rolling for several more seconds, capturing Joy's shocked expression and the uncomfortable silence that filled the studio. When they finally cut to commercial, you could hear Joy's voice, smaller now and uncertain, asking nobody in particular, "What just happened?" What happened was simple. She picked a fight with the wrong man and learned the hard way that some legends became legends for a reason. So what do you think? Did Joy Behar go too far? Or was she just doing her job as a journalist? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe for more stories that pull back the curtain on what really happens when the cameras are rolling.